Welcome to Entry Point Faith, where every week we discover fresh meaning in the world so you can find faith your way. This week's message is brought to you by guest speaker Mark Miller and is titled Release Resentment.
Please join me in prayer. God of all gifts, giver of grace, higher power of the universe, thank you for giving us free will and the ability to let go of our resentments. It is not always easy to do. When we are justified in anger and full of fear, we hold on. So many times we edge you out, believing that we are in control and can change the outcome. We are powerless. The recovery community finds comfort in the words of the Serenity Prayer, a reset back into right thinking. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. These words build trust, knowing we are not alone. We can hand over the resentments that keep us stuck. Glory be to you, God. Let go, let you. We are free. Amen.
Last fall, Jody and I decided to go out for a spontaneous date night to try out a new restaurant in town. Now, we don't do this a lot, so we were really looking forward to making it a special evening. Unfortunately, in a restaurant where the tables are situated rather closely together, we ended up getting seated next to Bridezilla. Now, I'm assuming everybody knows what I'm talking about. Some of you may even have a Bridezilla in your own family. There's a whole reality series about these young women who turn into little monsters as they insist on making the day they've waited for all their lives totally perfect. And if anyone or anything gets in the way of that, gets in the way of perfection, everybody better watch out. So our dinner that night was spent trying to enjoy our meal while listening to this overly indulged, spoiled brat complaining to her girlfriend about everyone and everything, including, of course, her parents who were springing for the wedding. I heard her say 10,000 for flowers alone, and his parents who were springing for the honeymoon at some Four Seasons in some tropical paradise. She was so angry and resentful, and I was getting such an earful. It was all I could do to keep from interrupting her to suggest that maybe all this negative stuff she was going through was some kind of sign, and that she should immediately go out, not waste time by staying for dessert, and cancel the wedding before it was too late. I went home that night and wrote about the experience on my Facebook page. Jerry Toomer responded with his typical, "That'll preach," which was immediately followed by Nancy asking, "When did I want to preach it?" So that got me thinking about, even more deeply about resentments, particularly the role they used to play in my life, the role they still occasionally play when I let them, and how much more at peace I am when I can cast them away. I have some friends that I meet frequently for coffee, and we just love pithy slogans. I chose one of those as the title for today's message. Resentments are our greatest offenders. So why do we say this? Why are resentments our greatest offenders? Well, honestly, it's because resentment is an incredibly powerful emotion, sometimes even more powerful than love. Let me give you an example of how powerful resentment can be. Now, if you were at Entry Point, you'd see the band playing the songs that I'm going to talk to you about, but we don't see that today. So I'm just going to tell you about a couple songs that I think you're familiar with. There's two songs that were used in today's service, one of which was Bob Dylan's song, Like a Rolling Stone. It's the one that says, "How does it feel?" And that song actually was the most popular song Bob Dylan ever wrote. It went to number 2. Bob Dylan never had a number 1 hit song. It went to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and has been an extremely popular song. The other song that comes to mind is a song by Carrie Underwood called Before He Cheats. And that's the one where she talks about scratching in her name and the side of his four-wheel drive. And that song was the number one song in the country for 2 months. And it is the biggest song that Carrie Underwood ever recorded. So the question is, what do these two songs have in common? Besides the fact that they were big songs and, big money makers for the people who wrote them. Well, the reality is that both these songs are about revenge. They're both about getting even with somebody who had it coming. That's why we love these songs. That's why they went to the top of the charts, because we all relate to them viscerally. Admit it. Most people love a justified resentment. When we hear Carrie Underwood talking about scratching her name into the side of her boyfriend's truck after he's hurt her, we relate to it because we've all wanted to get back at that person who hurt us. And when Bob Dylan sings to that old girlfriend or boyfriend who rejected us and broke our hearts, now how does it feel? We sing along at the top of our lungs because we've all fantasized about the day they'd realize how awful they had been. And for them now, it would be nothing but suffering because we were definitely not coming back. My friends, I'll admit as I stand here that I've been battling some heavy resentment this week. Our son Nate was robbed last Monday night in Atlanta. And the experience was traumatizing for him. And it was traumatizing for Jody and me too. Now, Nate is physically fine. But my gut tells me that it'll be a while before we all feel like he's safe again. I've had a lot of resentments related to this incident. I resented the two people who committed the crime, to the store's security guard who refused to assist my son in a moment when he was obviously in terrible distress, and to the Atlanta police who finally got around to showing up 2.5 hours after the 911 call went out. Honestly, my resentment is literally running riot. But here's the thing. I must let it go. You see, I just can't afford resentment in my life. Resentment can ruin friendships and break up families. Taken far enough, resentment can even kill a person. It happens. I've seen it. Even a small resentment can block us from experiencing joy. I mean, think about it. Resentment and joy can't really live in the same space. There's a spiritual writer I like a lot from back in the 30s. His name was Emmett Fox, and he noted this truth. I cannot enjoy peace and serenity if I also entertain opposing forces in my life. I cannot benefit from the efficacy of prayer if I hold on to resentments. There's literally no good that can come from harboring a resentment. So if we can see resentment as the cancer it is, then what's the cure? Well, I've often heard that expectations are future resentments in the making. I work hard at having as few of those as I can, but if I feel like my rights have been violated, it's game on. So I need a curative strategy to mitigate these resentments whenever they crop up. Here's what I've learned. The cure for resentment comes in a carefully mixed cocktail of actions. To defeat resentment, I must practice acceptance, forgiveness, humility, and gratitude. Taken daily, these 4 actions can literally rid us of our resentments and allow us to experience more serenity and joy in our lives. So let's talk about acceptance. I want to begin by saying that acceptance and tolerance are not the same thing. Whereas tolerance may help me to avoid confrontation, it doesn't bring me any peace because I still feel wrong, and there's very little peace in that. True acceptance comes to me mainly through my faith that nothing in God's world happens by mistake. There's no peace for me if I can't accept life on life's terms. I don't have to like it. I don't even have to understand it, but I have to accept it. And until I do, I have no serenity in my life. Every morning I ask my higher power to grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And what I've come to learn is that the more acceptance I'm able to practice, the more serenity I actually get in return. I tend to group forgiveness and humility together. Here's how they manifest for me when it comes to managing resentments. I use a process of self-inventory when I'm faced with a resentment. I used to put this kind of stuff down on paper, but today I kind of have the process sort of hardwired into my brain. When I feel resentment towards someone, I ask myself, what did they do to upset me? And then I think about how this makes me feel. By the way, I've pretty much learned that my resentments result from three things that get affected, or six things that get affected, rather. My self-esteem, which is how I feel about myself. My pride, which is how I want others to see me. My ambition, what I want to happen. My security, what I need to feel okay. My personal relationships, how I am with the people I need in my life. And my finances, how I survive. Honestly, this part of the inventory it's typically pretty easy. I seem to be pretty good at identifying who's done me wrong and how it makes me feel. But the next part in this process is a little harder because I have to figure out what my part in the resentment is. And believe me, I've learned that in every single case, given some time, I can find my part, the part I've played in that current calamity. It's true. Every time I look deep enough, I see that I also have a part in these things. So why is it so important that I identify my part in things? Well, it's because once I see that I've played a role, even if it's a small part, it makes it a lot easier for me to find forgiveness. And I have to forgive. Without forgiveness, the resentment can never truly fade. A second equally important reason for walking through this process is that it helps me to get right-sized. It's my ego that wants to scream at my offenders. Who do you think you are? Don't you know who I am? I can't really experience the grace of God if I can't get my big fat ego out of the way. Humility in the face of resentment can be a bitter pill to swallow, but humility allows me to open the door to my higher power and the people in my life. And of course, the more I can shrink my ego down to a reasonable size, the less likely I am to be constantly critical of other people. The less likely I will be to have expectations that turn into resentments. The last action is gratitude. Where resentment drains our energy as we ruminate on what we feel has been taken away from us, gratitude energizes us and opens us up, not only to what we receive, but to what we can give back. While resentment undermines our relationships, gratitude builds and sustains our relationships. You see, gratitude is an action, not just a feeling. To rightfully express gratitude, we not only express appreciation, but we share gratefulness through how we treat other people. In this way, gratitude becomes sort of a critical indicator for me of where I stand with another person regarding a resentment. If I have a person in my life with whom I can't share gratitude, that becomes a pretty clear signal that I have some level of resentment and something with that individual that I need to correct. Now, this is church, after all, so I have to be honest. The strategy is something I've only recently learned, and I don't have it down to the point where it's automatic. I still occasionally find myself wallowing in resentment. But because I'm at a stage in my life where peace and serenity are two of the most important things to me, I try not to let these things fester. I now know that these resentments not only hurt me, but they can ultimately hurt the people I love the most. And once I can see this, I also know that I have an obligation to make things right. As I close today, I hope I've given you something you'll think about the next time you're wrapped up in the rage or angst that usually accompany these resentments. Try asking yourself, does my justified anger make me feel any better? Or is it really like I'm just taking poison and hoping the other guy will get sick? I promise you that this strategy of humble self-examination, coupled with acceptance and forgiveness, and a little gratitude for the almost perfect world God has provided, works wonders. You may not change the reality of your situation, but you will undoubtedly find more peace in it. And if all else fails, just remember the words of the great theologian Elvis Costello, who once wrote in a song, What's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? Rock on.
Thanks for joining us for Entry Point Faith's online virtual service. If you'd like to join us, we meet every week at Connor Prairie in Fishers, Indiana. Be sure to join us next week at Connor Prairie in Fishers, Indiana for our special Mother's Day message called Turning into My Mother.